Ready? Committee's back from recess. Mr. Leon-Guerrero, please proceed with your testimony.
Yeah, okay. In the 12 years that I've been working as a community advocate, 36,000 children have been born at GMH. Next slide. At the rate things move here on Guam, 30,000 or more children will be born at the existing GMH before a new hospital opens its doors, if it ever does. And I have reason to be wary about that. We're talking about the difference between fantasy and reality. The governor lied to us when she told us she could build a hospital in 3 or 4 years. Next slide. So I'm going to start with the Army Corps of Engineers report that was issued. And since that report is issued, there have been no studies done. Next slide. The closest thing we have is this contract from 2014 from the Matrix Group, which is a consulting firm that specializes in land use, not healthcare. They had a contract with the Hagana Restoration Committee or Authority, an IDIQ contract from 2014. And that is the basis that the governor issued a $1.8 million contract as a task order for this. So bear in mind, having the Matrix Design Group design a hospital would be the same thing as having a transmission mechanic perform brain surgery on your child. Does not compute. Next slide. There has been no stakeholder meetings, and the governor lied to us when on KUAM she told the people of Guam that we already had the charrettes, we've already had the stakeholder meetings, they're done. She lied. Next slide. When we had the interviews with the Army Corps of Engineers, they told us it would be $2 to $3 million and 18 months to 3 years to do a charrette. And here we have the governor right here in this building telling you and the people of Guam, we've already done the charrettes, we've already had the stakeholder meetings, we've already got the plan. It's nearly done. She lied. Next slide. This is the committee. These are 95% government employees. There is only 2 people in this committee in the medical community that are not government employees. One's an optometrist, one's a nurse. The rest are government employees or financial people who have a vested interest in seeing this process move forward. Nowhere in this committee are anybody from the 45 medical clinics or the 592 private practices or the dozens of medical technicians or any of the community advocates or nonprofit organizations that work with healthcare. None of these people are represented. Next slide. There is no site control. Next slide. Right now we have competing interests. We have the military looking at the possibility of reestablishing control over this site to put a missile defense platform there, which is incompatible with a hospital. And we have the possibility that the families who rightfully own that land will be getting that land back as they should. Next slide. There have been no EPA studies done, no geology studies done, and on the basis of the work required to complete an EPA study, as we saw with all the projects up there at Anderson Air Force Base and down at Naval Station, this type of EPA site clearance and geologic study takes anywhere from 2 to 3 years just to do the groundwork. So if it's going to take 2 to 3 years to do the groundwork, to analyze the land, providing that she actually gets control of the land, there's no way in hell we're going to build a hospital in 3 or 4 years. Next slide. And since we haven't done the site studies on any piece of property, we haven't done the architectural engineering drawings, which will take 2 to 3 years, as we've seen with Simon Sanchez. In fact, I think Simon Sanchez, we're going on 4 years since they gave the approval to go ahead and start doing the A&E. So if it's going to take 3 to 4 years to do, 2 to 3 years just to do the land, and 3 to 4 years just to do the A&E, that's 7 years right there. There's no way in hell we're going to build a hospital in 3 or 4 years. Next slide. So how did the Army Corps of Engineers arrive at this $817 million price tag? That's where I am really interested, because I remember a press conference right after the Corps was here, and they were talking about 150 to 200 million to renovate Government of Guam's hospital, and 400 to 500 million to build a brand new one. So how did it jump from those numbers in that press conference up to 817 million? Are these numbers even grounded in reality? Next slide. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. W. Edward Deming was a data scientist who helped bring Japan from a third world country to the second largest economy in the world in 20 years. So what he says makes sense. So what we see right now is this $817 million is based on no data. So let's look at data on what it actually costs to build a hospital about the size of the one we want to build here for Guam. Next slide. As you can see here, we have 2 hospitals here, one in Washington, D.C., which is a 136-bed hospital. And if you know anything about Washington, D.C., you know land there is very expensive. And in Washington, D.C. is a union town, so labor is very expensive. The government of Washington, D.C. is building a 136-bed hospital for $375 million. In Massachusetts, they're building a 150-bed hospital for $255 million. And you know, Massachusetts is not a cheap state. Next slide. Now we have another hospital in Las Vegas. They want to build a 150-bed hospital for $375 million. And up in Reno, where I used to live, they want to build a 200-bed hospital for $300 million. Next slide. And here we have a hospital in Florida. They want to build a 166-bed hospital for $326 million. And oddly enough, we have a hospital, a 136-bed hospital that was built here on Guam just a few years ago for $315 million. So where did we get that $817 million from? Next slide. It's a question of priorities. Politicians' priorities versus the people's priorities. And if we go to the next slide. One key thing that was identified in the Army Corps of Engineers report. Next slide, please. On page 30, it would cost $21 million to put in effect the key repairs identified by the Army Corps of Engineers to extend the useful life of the hospital until such time as a new hospital could be built and raise the quality of the building and its operating condition to assist in accreditation. 21 million. So what did we do with the 21 million? Next slide. Instead of investing in a Guam Memorial Hospital, we sent it to Tumon. That's what we're talking about, the question of priorities. What's more important, the people of Guam or the politicians of Guam? Next slide. Those with nothing to hide nothing. And that gets back to what I've been going through and what you as senators are going through, trying to wrap your arms around what is taking place in Adelup and at Guam Memorial Hospital and at GITA when it comes to creating a new hospital. Next slide. ADLOOP tells us that this plan is a secret. Why are we keeping this plan a secret? Because this is a public health care issue. Why is it secret? That's the real question here. Next slide. It's so secret that the only way I'm able to get information is I have to follow up my FOIAs to the governor's office, to Guam Memorial Hospital, and oddly enough to the Department of Public Safety with a legal action in order to get any information. And I'm wondering, how many of you have taken the governor to court? Raise your hands, please. No? Okay, next slide. That's the only way you're going to get anything out of here. And here's a list of the documents I've gotten so far, which oddly enough, the government released to you after I took them to court. Because before I took them to court, you guys didn't have access to this stuff because it wasn't up on the GITA website. In fact, they put it up on the GITA website in compliance with my efforts. So you're welcome. Next slide. Now, I heard through the grapevine that there was a planning meeting for the new hospital. I went to Guam Memorial Hospital. I talked to the staff. I'm here for the planning meeting, the new hospital planning meeting. They tell me, oh, the new hospital planning meeting, it's not here, it's at the Hyatt. I go to the Hyatt. I'm there for an hour and a half, waiting for the events to start. And then we have a difference of opinion. Next slide. Now, the governor herself called in from Washington, D.C., to comment on my arrest. The Guam Memorial Public Relations officer told me I barged into a workshop on human resource management training, but in the arrest report, the legal counsel for Guam Memorial Hospital tells police officers that they are having a construction planning meeting. Now you see why we're all confused, because ADLOOP is telling us one thing, but the reality is something different, and that's going to require a higher level of due diligence on the part of our elected representatives, because we now know that the governor can't be trusted to be truthful and forthwith with the information that you need to do your jobs right. And you've got a big job ahead of you on this project, because you are the policy makers, you guys are the budget makers, and we're going to get into the details. Next slide. So we're looking at, there is no credible basis whatsoever for that $817 million. But when we look at the legislation, we're looking at between $2 and $3 billion for a building. That is after we take that $300 million and make a down payment. Think about that. We have a small population, 153,000 people, 40,000 families, 80% of those families making less than $50,000 a year. We're already balancing a $1 billion budget on their backs, and now we're going to add to that the cost of a $3 billion hospital. But we're here to talk about land and site selection, and I'm going to stick to that. We have to look at the logistical realities. Next slide. If we go out to Eagles Field, this defies all logistical common sense necessary to make public health care cost-effective and efficient. Because out here in the middle of nowhere, there is no support for this hospital. Next slide. So before we can even begin to break ground on this hospital, we have to upgrade the water and sewer system. That's going to be between $75 and $100 million just to do that, based on the current projects we have taking place. We also have to upgrade the power system, and we have to put these lines underground. And we're going to have to widen Route 15 to 4 lanes. And we're going to have to take those 4 lanes all the way up to Jigo, Plus, we're going to have to put an access road across this property by Commercial Tire Depot so that we can eliminate that bottleneck on Route 10. We're talking $200 to $300 million of roads construction that have to take place first so that we can actually get all the construction equipment up and down the road and move all the parts and equipment from the commercial port up to this site that we're going to be doing all this construction in. So we're talking about $500 million into the ground before that $300 million down payment gets sent and that $2.4 to $3 billion building gets built. Next slide. So those are wild-ass guesses that the governor's office and their committee are making because they're making those assessments on no information. So the best site to build Guam Memorial Hospital is right here on the existing site. Now you're going to hear everybody from the administration tell you, it's impossible, we can't do that, it's only 16 acres, right? You've heard that. Well, here's Kapi'olani women and children. They're sitting on 4.8 acres. They're in the process of upgrading their facility right now from 250,000 square feet to 400,000 square feet. Could you back up? We're going a little fast there. Back up to the Kapi'olani. So they're going to go from a 209-bed hospital to a 253-bed hospital, but they're taking their neonatal intensive care unit from 12,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. And as someone who has been to Kapi'olani children, often I can tell you I appreciate the fact they're taking their parking garage from 308 to 1,600 to 1,000 stalls on 4 acres. We don't need 102 acres. Straub Clinic, downtown. I used to work next to Straub Clinic. I used to walk there all the time, so I didn't have to deal with parking. They're in the process of rebuilding their unit on 5 acres from 200,000 square feet to 760,000 square feet while running a hospital inside this facility. They're going to go from 159 beds to 260 beds, but the part that people in Hawaii will really appreciate, they're going from 400 parking stalls to 1,650 parking stalls. So there's no reason why you as policymakers should be accepting from anybody else in the government that we can't build a new GMH on the site of the existing facility. Next slide. There are other alternatives that this committee didn't look at. We have the original site right there, which is, we now know, is somewhere around 30 acres. Then we could also build on top of the elementary schools. We could relocate the elementary schools to the cliff line and build right there. So we could either build on the cliff line that's already vacant, or we could go on the elementary schools. But here's my favorite site. Next slide. The Hokoboten building, the Guam Power Authority base yard there, Hokoboten building. At one point in time, Gita was about to foreclose on them because they were so far behind on their rent that they were going to loan them $5 million so they could pay their rent, which I thought was stupid. And then we have the empty building next to it, which is the former Tropicolor. That lot right there, we could build a Guam Memorial Hospital that would rival the one that Kapi'olani Women's and Children is building. We already have the roadway infrastructure in place. We have water, power, sewer in place, so we would not have to incur $500 million worth of expense. Next slide. Now we're dealing with the financial realities, and I'll just get through this part, and then we'll go to questions. Next slide. So here is the PowerPoint presentation from Gita. What we're looking at right here is $817 million, but it doesn't make any sense because Guam Memorial Hospital in 2021 generated $93 million in revenue, Expenses were 140 million, so they ran a $50 million loss. So it doesn't make any sense to spend 4 to 5 billion, and that's the number we're really talking about out on Eagles Field, on an operation that loses $50 million a year. Next slide. And this is from the OPA report that shows that ever since Bill 30 was passed, government of Guam has been taking it in the shorts at Guam Memorial Hospital, because basically what we've done is we've seen 30% of outpatient business move to Guam Regional, and we've seen dramatic increases in the emergency room visit, as 75% of our people here on Guam have inadequate or no insurance. That is the real problem we should be solving right here, because the basis, next slide, I already covered that. Next slide. Because of the way our economy is set up, most people that even have jobs don't have insurance because of the way the economy is set up. And the government of Guam health insurance is not all that great. I don't know if you guys know it, but basically, I know people that will never be able to use government of Guam insurance, so they are now using the emergency room as their health care provider. Our economy never recovered from 2008, and now we had the pandemic that slammed our economy even harder. We have war and recession coming our way. This is not the time to embark on a $5 billion project. Also, our population is declining. Our population has been declining for 20 years, and as a result of the local economic collapse, we're losing more people every day. More businesses are closing, so the government's revenue is going down, and the number of people that have health insurance is going down. This is not the environment that we build a $3 billion building on. The best thing to do is to take $21 million, make the critical repairs that we need to Guam Memorial Hospital now, and upgrade the hospital that we have now, and begin the process the way it should have been done, starting with the charrettes, determine what we really need here on Guam. We don't need to turn Guam into the medical care center of the Pacific, because we know we're not going to attract medical tourism here to this island, when they could go to Thailand, they can go to Taiwan, they can go to Manila, they can go to Los Angeles. So what we're looking at here is, hold this slide right here. There is a real problem here, because what the governor is proposing to do by entering to a lease is bypass the need to come to you for the authority for funding through bonds. But I submit, a $70 million a year expenditure, probably closer to $80 million a year if we include the infrastructure work, is not going to be, it's basically a tax on the people of Guam. And the people of Guam are not going to sit idly by and allow the government to enter into an $80 million a year obligation after spending $300 million, because that $80 million is going to be coming out of the general fund. Already the governor's promising to fund so many things out of Section 8 funds, it's almost like we're getting $1 billion a year in Section 8 funds sometimes. But that's not going to happen. That's not reality. The reality is we have to live within our means, and our means right now is not $80 million a year lease rent on top of $140 million a year of operating costs. That will not fly. So we have to live within our means, we have to fix the problems we have now, and plan for the future. And planning for the future would be doing the things the governor said she would do, but hasn't done. Hold public meetings, stakeholder meetings, get the medical community involved, because there's no way doctors who have spent millions of dollars on their own practices and buildings and offices and homes are going to support a facility out in Manilo. We asked them to come here. We asked them to make these investments. The time has come now for you as policymakers to support the medical experts who came here because we asked, who made the investments we asked them to make. The time has come for the policymakers of Guam to support them and keep the hospital in Tamuning, the third highest population center on Guam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langra. We have Mr. Lotz online. Is he still online? Mr. Lotz?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Speaker and fellow senators. First of all, I do want to share an appreciation from hearing about the original landowners at the Eagle Field area. I think it's very important that that land be returned to the original owners. I think it would lend to land stability and some good land tenure on our island. Ken has done some good work there on costs. I just want to add to his comparison of hospital costs that the new Naval Hospital that was constructed in 2014 was at $158 million for 48 beds. My own figure for GRMC is actually less than what Ken had. But since you're talking financing, it is a ever increasing, growing rate. The legislation passed by the Guam legislature authorizes a lease purchase of up to $600 million. That is only a portion of what is now being projected as a cost, and there's considerable uncertainty as to where the rest will come. It's been stated it may come from federal pandemic funds, but again, it's one of those items where it's very not clearly been given information that has been cleared by the federal government. The other aspect of this funding for a public-private partnership is the people of Guam will pay this back over 40 years. My question is, the private sector that's going to build this facility, what is their collateral going to be for this loan? That is unstated, and I would find it very hard to come up with 600 million more as collateral to define this. I do also want to mention, just for clarity, it seemed to be some confusion, but the old GMH site is clearly Epal Point, and I think we should be using that site instead of going to the military site. If for one thing, the federal law that has been surfaced as to what the government of Guam should lease the Eagle Field site for comes at fair market value, and that is probably going to be in the area, a very rough estimate of $2.5 million per year. So it's kind of a bitter pill that we would have to lease our own land for a hospital, and there's no guarantee that the land would become ours in the end. And of course, then that would affect the overall financing and the collateral. There's been mention of healthcare complex, but I've seen no justification that the behavioral health facility is having problems with its structure, and no justification why that should be replaced. As far as if there's some concern on limitations of the site, Ken's picture pointed out some things that were quite evident. You build up. Not only is building up better use of your real estate, but it's also going to save money in energy and maintenance. Going back to the Eagle Field site, I think we need to know that Doppler weather radar would have to be relocated, which I believe is going to cost at least $2 million. That would be an upfront cost to be paid for by the government of Guam. The missile defense system was briefly mentioned. Earlier this year, Joint Region Mary Anna's very specifically stated that all actions on land transfers to Guam were deferred until it was determined as to what sites, now that's more than one, would be needed for a missile defense system, presumably the Aegis missile defense system. You can go online and see the one overseas that we are in the process of developing to get a comparison of the site, and that is in Romania. Now that's only for the missile component. You would need other sites around the island, multiple sites for radar and other devices to detect incoming missiles and other types of airborne threats to the island. The missile defense system would only be one component. So we're talking multiple aspects, but the media adequately reported that that was on hold until that has been decided. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Navy for their environmental impact report on that, and I have not seen that. I'm thinking it has not even commenced to work on that. Well, what is troubling also is we no longer have a healthcare planning agency. We would be considerably ahead in a multitude of questions that are coming up if we had a healthcare planning agency that could give sound information, professionally run, that would tell us what type of facilities we are needed and what staffing is needed and what funding is needed. The conclusion that EPOW Point is not large enough seems to be a decision that is lacking some substantial information, that we're still waiting as to that justification. Instead, we just see a continuing, ever expanding list. And for the first time now, I've heard a medical plaza. I presume it's an office building for doctors. What I'm also finding is missing in these lists of facilities is the Office of the Medical Examiner. The Medical Examiner is a different entity than Guam Memorial Hospital. That has escaped that listing and needs to be put on there. I've also talked to some individuals and seen what Gita has put online. And what escapes me is there's really no broad interagency review that, at least when I was in government of Guam, was expected for projects like this. I'm talking Guam EPA, Department of Agriculture, Coastal Zone Management, Historic Preservation, those sort of aspects. That's lacking in order to give a good, meaningful background. Instead, we have a Gita contracting out the matrix, as Ken has outlined, that has really no background in healthcare planning. And of course, as we continue on this road, the time keeps extending. It was first 3 years, now it's saying it's up to 7 years. To me, that's unacceptable. And what is further worrisome is with these additional proposed units coming in to this medical plaza, there needs to be a concurrent study on what staffing and maintenance requirements are needed. If Guam Memorial Hospital had been properly maintained from the beginning, there would be no crisis over there. Fortunately, with leadership from the legislature, we now have some money going into that area of maintenance. And I think we need to focus on, as Ken has said, and I agree, we need to look at our immediate needs to shore up Guam Memorial Hospital. Significant amount of money needs to be put in there so we don't have continual leaks as we've seen on TV. And then there's always the case that the electrical panel may falter. We also need this planning process to be completely transparent. It's a violation of this committee meeting is a violation of the Open Government Act. They should be open to the public. They should be announced like we see numerous government agencies putting ads in the newspaper. We need that transparency. Now, I've also provided the committee, and I trust it's available in some form by the legislature, 4 of my prior opinion pieces that I wrote on this subject in the Pacific Daily News. So that's a rather highlight of many of my concerns. I appreciate this time. and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lotz. Thank you for your patience, and we will incorporate your letters to the editor as part of your testimony. Situs Masi. Okay, everyone, thank you for your patience. I am really so impressed by all of you staying here for 4 hours now. All right, we have left Maria Hernandez, Antonio Sablan, and Tomas Bernardo. So Maria Hernandez.
Buenas and half a day. Situs Masi for holding this very important hearing today. My family is a Flores Apu family. I'm the great-granddaughter of Benigno Leon Guerrero Flores and Dolores Martinez Flores, and great-great-granddaughter of Ana Metanani Pangilinan, original landowners of Retidian Point. Our families are all tuning in on Zoom and watching on the legislature YouTube channel. We wanted to come today to testify to show support for the original landowners here fighting for their land back. I always do this. Well, so the Eaglesfield families, they face a struggle that many Chamorro families face today, that they're displaced and still fighting for their lands' return decades later. And these Chamorro lands were taken under duress with unjust compensation. Wrongs in the past need to be made right. The Retidian families wholeheartedly stand behind the Eaglesfield families. And I'm here today representing Hita Latexan, our Retidian families organization fighting for the return of our land proposed to be used as a military firing range complex. I'm also here representing Ihagan Femalawan Guahan, an indigenous women-led organization that works to protect the well-being of women and girls in Guahan, and the Mena Dahi Coalition, a coalition of indigenous Chamorro organizations that work as caretakers of ancestral lands, all organizations dedicated to the protection of Guahan's precious cultural and natural resources. And we all stand behind the Eaglesfield families calling for the return of their ancestral land. The families here today, it actually makes me emotional to be here to watch you, because I've been attending these sort of hearings since I was 5 years old. And seeing you here today, it reminds me of my Saina, who fought till the day they died for the return of their land. And we all need to get behind these families as a community. We want the families to know that anything that we can do to help get the word out, any protests that you have, we will be there. We know firsthand what it's like to have a deep connection to your land and yearn for its return. To ensure a future for our children and their children. And as Chamorro people, our land is our most precious resource. Our land is sacred, and as a community, we talk a lot about how we can be more self-sustaining. The key is our land, the path to our people being able to sustain ourselves to real security and longevity. For our children and their children's children to thrive is to continue to fight for our land back, and we need that land back now, so that our generation can be taught indigenous practices that have sustained our people for thousands of years before our sign to pass on, and that knowledge is lost forever. We need to get back to our land. Right now, currently projects that are ongoing that are, many families are losing their land to military projects. And what we're doing is we're creating a future for our children and their children where they may only be able to feel that connection through their land in textbooks. And that's not a future that we should be working toward as Chamorro people. If you look on the streets, more and more houseless Chamorros line the streets. If you look at home listings, a dilapidated home, I just saw somebody share it was a shack. It was a dilapidated home that was just in ruin, and it was renting for $350,000. Our people are suffering, and no Chamorro person should be homeless on a Chamorro homeland. It's been 70 years since these Manila families have returned home. It's time. It's time to return their land. the government needs to look for another location for the hospital. Based on discussions today, I think it makes sense to revise the plans to make it fit at the old hospital location in Tamuning. If the military is able to give this land to GovGuam for the hospital, that means it's excess. It's no longer needed by the military if they're willing to let GovGuam use it for the hospital. Return the land. Our leaders need to stand strong, united, in saying that the military will never take this land for a missile defense system if it's not turned into a hospital. On behalf of the organizations I'm part of, on behalf of the Ratidian families, we humbly ask that the leaders continue to work with the Eagles Field families to right the wrongs of the past, return their land. Situs Masi.
Situs Masi. Mr. Antonio Sablan.
Buenas, Senadora, then Governor Terlaje. Don't forget, Ron Laguarnia to be the Lieutenant Governor. Because, boy, what a speech presentation he did. I can't compete with that guy. I'm not here to chastise the plan about the Eagle Field. I mean, everything has already been said, so it's better that I don't say anything. Because the last time I spoke up against the governor, I felt like a veteran twice. Because I'm a service-connected disabled veteran with the military, a U.S. military. I got drafted. I'm not even a U.S. citizen in my mind. I refused to serve in the U.S. District Court as a juror because I told the judge, count me out because I'm not a U.S. citizen. And so you guys stole my land, my family's land. How am I going to serve you guys? You know? Anyway, I'm saying that I'm a double veteran because when I spoke up to the governor, I became the second veteran again because I received a letter saying, thank you for your service, but we no longer need you at the Ancestral Land Commission. I was a commissioner. So, needless to say, I got fired. My question here is that I'm sure many of us have been visited the Philippines, St. Luke Hospital in Global City. That's a huge hospital, but it's not on 102 acres of land. So that's already treading on the governor's vision. But let's look at that and what could we do to not have to utilize that much land? Let me tell you, the previous three people that make the presentation here, Ken, I salute you. Boy, there's an old saying that facts and figures don't lie. So I can't compete with anything. Okay, so excellent presentation. And Ron, the Lieutenant Governor, is a true politician. but he's right on the money too. You know, one other question, may I say that currently I am a veteran Ancestral Land Commissioner, and I'm also the current Magalahin Nation tomorrow. So I'm still a troublemaker. I am in the process of looking at all these federal land takings, and I like to urge the Guam legislature to stop asking the thief, what could we do with our own land? So let's I told this to the governor, that's why I lost my job. Tell the U.S. government that this is what we want done to our land. We don't have to be begging and kissing their rear end about our plans to use for our land. I know you guys have heard enough and listened to enough people, so I'll make my presentation short because the people that made the presentation previously to me did an excellent job, and I bow down and I salute them all. Si Jus Masi and Si Jus Masi Lokip for Damzo for being here. I really truly appreciate that. Okay? Si Diyos masi, Governor Talay.
Si Diyos masi, Loki. Okay, I'm going to call one more time for David Underwood. And if not, then we will have Mr. Thomas Bernardo. He's been waiting very patiently to be the last one. Mr. Bernardo.
Can you hear me?
Ungen.
Madam Speaker, senators, everyone that was here, family and friends, thank you for joining us today or inviting us here today. I just found out about this meeting on Friday. On Saturday, I found out about the meeting last night. I'm really proud of my elders today and my friends. I have many new friends. Almost every legislator, the governor herself, the lieutenant governor, are all my friends on Facebook. Those of you who are in office today that did not accept my Facebook friend request from 4 to 6 to 10 years ago may have made a mistake, because I live half of my life in basic anonymity. My father is Tomas Cruz Bernardo. I am not Tomas Tenorio Bernardo. I am Thomas Tenorio Bernardo Jr. So you can tell there was a little conflict between my parents on what my name should have been. So out of respect for my mother, I remind people that it's spelled Thomas. I don't know what happened to me when I was born, but for lack of better words, I was a rotten kid. So I earned a lot of discipline. I was isolated for many years. My father survived the war. Then he was drafted into Korea. He, with less than a 7th grade education, he amassed a 36-year career at the Navy PWC. He died early. He, in my opinion, was a victim of the time. The war, yes, the war was bad. The Japanese were mean to us. They killed us, our people. My father told me stories of how he witnessed family and friends, parientes, die in Mount Labugan. By the way, how much time do I have?
I'm not limiting you, however, just look at the people behind you, and it's the almost 5 hours.
I'm going to tell you again, I'm really proud of my family from last night, because I know maybe half of them did not get more than 4 hours sleep overnight. Because I myself only got 3.5 hours sleep. But I woke up at 7 o'clock and there was tons of messages. We are the Ciprianos. On my father's side, we're called Familia Tagalog, because my great-grandfather migrated from the Philippines. Growing up, I used to get in trouble because I was usually the tallest one, and I did not socialize well. Primo and Frankie here 3 years ago, when we were meeting for his sister's rosaries, and I made it a point to attend every rosary that I could, because I missed a lot of her death time because I was sick. Well, my uncles here will tell you, I'm probably I don't really mix well with people. I'm not, I lack social skills, to be honest with you. If I were to be analyzed, people say, these guys, my mind is like part Ken, Uncle John, Auntie Mary. The Ciprianos, what was not mentioned today was that the Ciprianos are a family of healers. In 2017, I learned that I am a descendant of the son of Chief Matapang. So now I understand what was wrong with me all along. I'm a Matapang. So, Primunran Laguanya, I'm not sure, I believe I'm related to Tony over there. Even Ken. The governor is my niece. Through my grandmother's side of the family. I think every sitting senator, governor, over the last, or since the Organic Act, I'm somewhat related to. I wasn't really sure what to say here today, but I had to think about it. That's why I asked, one of the reasons why I asked to speak last. Do we need a new hospital? Do we deserve this grand medical facility? I would like to say yes. My grandmother in Gracia, Borra Cruz Familiancici, after a long illness, multiple miscarriages, died before I was born. We had a fairly new hospital at the time. My grandfather, Joaquin Kitugua Tenorio, died in 1974 after becoming ill and having to travel off island for medical care. He died in California. Many people don't remember him because he's been gone almost 50 years. But he was known to be one of the greatest cirujanos. I don't have a personal interest in Lalo Mangilo. Everybody wants to call it Eagles Field. It's Lalo Mangilo. Respect the land by calling it by its proper name. Why? Who knows? There probably was a lot of flies because all my relatives were raising so many animals and chickens. Of course it's going to attract flies over there. The hospital, when my grandfather died, my birth certificate says Oka Point, okay? Now it's Ipaw Point. So we didn't even know where we were located when I was born in 1961. I remember when I believe it's the Archdiocese was collecting money to build this hospital, GMAs that we know now. Many of my grand aunts and uncles died in that hospital. The one I remember the most is my uncle Juan Cabrera. He was buried alive with Mrs. Emsley during the war. Okay. Before I forget, my grandmother, Josepa Cruz Bernardo. She's a Familian Thomas and Familian Baloco. Ada. I get my name from Tomas Ada Cruz Familian Thomas. There were so many Tomas in the family, they had to give him as Tomas. But my mom didn't want any part of that because these are radical people we're talking about. My dad was, his name preceded him, and I like to think I've always wanted to fill his shoes, but I learned a long time ago I cannot. My dad retired after 36 years in the Navy, 2 years in the Korean conflict. He was drafted. He never complained about how he never really complained about how the Japanese treated him. But he used to tell me stories about how they get 4 young Chamorros and they move a giant coconut tree across the field. I left Guam in 1986. Thank God the jobs I took on did not work out, and I was forced to. Well, I had decisions. I could have gone to California or somewhere else. I could be retired, and don't understand what's going on in Guam because there was an opening in Kahului, Maui.
Dispense them, Mr. Bernardo, but I'm going to have to ask you to.
Okay, I will. I returned in 1990. My father took ill. He was already got something. We took him to the clinic. They said, stop smoking. 3 weeks later, we took him to the hospital. He was sent by hospital to that by ambulance. After 30 days, he was released. He said, we can't do anything for him anymore. So he was bedridden in a coma for 2 years, then finally died when Typhoon Omar passed. Okay. My mother died in 2015 after 25 years of battling diabetes and heart disease. We had to take her to California. We took her under other reasons, basically restricted to fly in a plane. But she had like a shoebox worth of medicine. But before we left, when we got there, we were told she needed quadruple bypass, maybe 5 bypasses. The hospital that's standing there now was perfectly fine. Actually, when my mom passed away in 2015, she developed gangrene, lower backside of her right leg. She died at GMH. A few months later, GRMC opened up, and they had this fancy hyperbaric chamber. I said, oh my God, if they had just opened up in time, my mom could still be alive. But I watched my mom after she was told she needed an amputation on a Thursday, slowly said, I'm going. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, gone. She lost her will to live. So, okay. So my time is limited. Yes, we needed a hospital, but how is this hospital going to function without the proper expertise, medical expertise? I believe, I don't know when the old GMH was built, but it's got to be around 1955 to today. GRMC was a last opportunity. As far as I'm concerned, we were bamboozled into allowing for QC certificates, and then as soon as the hospital is built, they start removing the critical care. Where's the cardiologist? Where's the specialist? I know GRMC recently got an award. They got a distinguished award for pre-stroke treatment. This new hospital is supposed to be all-inclusive, but can we really get critical care on Guam? If we could not afford critical care on Guam over the last 50, 70 years, what makes us say, how can we afford it when this monstrosity of a complex is going to cost over $1 billion? I like to think I'm not a very smart man because I made some decisions over my life that also affected my health. In 2018, we had 2 perfectly good hospitals. Or 3 because there's Naval Hospital. We keep forgetting about that hospital. Why don't we knock on the door? If this new hospital is also supposed to take care of veterans and military, why do my relatives why do our family, the people of Guam, have to travel off island? So my point is, like, do we really need a new hospital? Because as far as I'm concerned, if you think of the concept of the mobile butcher trailer, you get 4 of those, 5 of those. One is an ER. You can use one to operate a cardiologist. What is it? Bypass surgery, kidney surgery. Pre- and post-stroke operations. But because this big hospital, I believe, is going to be beyond our reach. Those three elementary schools that are going to be closed, why don't we refurbish them to become, think of a MASH unit. I believe we are in a crisis, we are in a war when it comes to healthcare. But there's so many people that stand to make a lot of money off of this that we forget. Who's going to pay for it? One of my uncles is not here today because although he had a bypass surgery about 10 years ago, he's relapsed. He might have to go off island. We got 2, 3 good hospitals, but he still has to go off island. He's a veteran, so he cannot get his care here at Naval Hospital. I'm telling you, yes, we need a hospital, but we need people willing to work on Guam. I've heard Senator Tello. I've been actually in conflict with her for some other reasons, but she has really great plans about a facility for the elderly, critical care. But I'm telling you, those are great plans. It's great for other places. Do we need a new hospital? I say we need a building that looks like a hospital, functions like a hospital, but allows our people, and man, I use the word people, our people, but the residents of Guam, all the residents of Guam, to not have to fly off island for simple things. Stent procedure, they're done often. When I was in LA with my mom in 2004, there was like 30 people in a row. Okay.
Yeah, please wrap it up, Mr. Berger.
Okay. Last night, my Uncle John mentioned to the governor many other things that are issues on island. One of my suggestions for today is, please, governor, senators, and the judicial branch, let's regroup, let's refocus. The narrative, as far as I'm concerned, since the 1950s, since the war, has been Uncle Sam's the bad guy. Yes, the Chamorros, a lot of Chamorros lost their property, so Uncle Sam's the bad guy. But I'm hearing things today. The visitors, the migrants to the island are not, we're now being displaced by these migrants. But to all the leaders of Guam today, please change the narrative. Guam has changed. The people of Guam are not the same anymore. Yes, this is Tano Chamorro, but we don't only have Chamorros living here anymore. When we talk in the vernacular, and then next thing you know, we're comparing what this group from that group, we're actually disenfranchising people that we invited to come and live in this community. As I mentioned before, the Subianos are known as healers. Please start a narrative which is inclusive of every resident on Guam. I don't want to sound like other political candidates, but I'm finding myself having to change my skin. But I have a condition, Madam Speaker. I have carotid artery stenosis. In September 2021, I was told I have 85% blockage of my left carotid artery. So, forgive me that's why I asked earlier, give me a time, sir.
And I'm going to give you time, Pago,
please,
if you can.
let's change the narrative. It shouldn't be Democrats versus Republicans anymore. It shouldn't be red or blue. Why are we following the narrative in the United States when we are Chamorros here? We are Chamorro Filipino. I'm Tagalog, pamilyang Tagalog. We have Koreans, Chukis. The greater Micronesian people live on Guam. Every place, we belong to that group. We belong to Oceania, Micronesia. We're brothers and sisters with everybody. Everybody wants to talk about whose culture is the best, but all of our cultures have similarities. We want to take care of our people, but some people
Please.
have made riches on the backs of the people. Yes, we need a hospital, but it has to be able to attract critical care expertise. Otherwise, we're still going to be sending people off island. And the reason why the hospital has to be so big is because people have to spend more time in it in the future. Uncle John mentioned something yesterday, it was very important. One of the things to focus, please, 1 minute. One of the things is important to focus. What is making our people sick? What is making the residents of Guam sick? So, we go back to the standard. We in education. Please, for my family's benefit, build the hospital elsewhere. Let us be able to return to the lands, return to where our heart and soul belongs. I know I have ancestors that bled and sweated there. If you sell your land today, the money is gone in a few weeks, in a year. We need the land to perpetuate the livelihood of every resident of Guam. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you sincerely for that testimony. And again, I want to thank all of you for your testimony. and my colleagues. I have just 2 questions for land management. If you could just help me out here. The Lalu location for the hospital, is there a limit to the height? Is there a height restriction there?
At one time there was in the beginning because of the radar facility besides that, but I think the limit is 70 feet now.
70 feet. How many floors is that?
It's about 4 or 5 floors. You know,
And that's a limit?
Yeah, that was the limit on it, yes.
Okay. Now, that's the current limit, height limit.
That's correct.
Okay, si Diyos masi. All right. Do you guys have any questions? Senator Blanc? All right. Again, so to conclude this hearing, I want to sincerely thank all of you. It's been 5 hours, 10 minutes, maybe longer for some of you who came earlier, and I want to thank you for your patience. Thank you for your showing your true interest and helping us as leaders to make a decision to do the right thing in this situation. And I think, I just want to give you hope that we can all work together. That is the goal, right? It's not to fight. It's not to do any of that. It's to work together. It's to make it transparent so that everybody knows what everyone should know, so no one's being fooled, and so that we know if we have directors, for example, who are advocating for what we expect they are advocating or for something different. And I want to thank our directors who've been here today, the Guam Memorial Hospital CEO, the Director of Land Management, the Director of Ancestral Lands. They've done a lot of work for this new hospital. I know that. And I know that they've been tasked to do many, many things. And I want to thank Director Birch for his work on this new bill for ancestral landowners. And this is to take care of problems that we have had for many, many years. And so I'm going to look at this bill. We will definitely take a look at it and use it if it will remedy those issues. But for what we've seen today, we've got a hospital, we've got a location that's been chosen, preferred, we've got contracts that we still have questions on. I guess I'm going to conclude it that way. We still have questions on those things, on the procurement of them or the non-procurement of them, and what their goals were versus the work that we have seen produced by our own agencies. The choice of using that contract versus the choice of going with the Army Corps' estimate of to do the planning and the studies. Those are just choices, but so again, when I say we can work together, I want to acknowledge, so Director Birch and many of you landowners are very concerned, and rightly so, that there is a public law, 106-504. This is a United States public law, and in Director Birch's testimony, he says, it appears that the U.S. public law makes the federal government's position stronger should it decide to enforce the restrictive covenants contained in its deeds to the government of Guam. Should the government of Guam transfer property to the ancestral landowners, or the commission with the intent to return the property to the original landowners, it could be viewed as a violation of U.S. public law 106-504. I'm not blind. I acknowledge that that is a risk, and that has actually been a risk. It's been a risk in every single land return that the Guam Ancestral Land Returns has effectuated over all these years. It's been a risk because the United States government has always opposed that return to the ancestral landowners, but the government of Guam has done it anyway. We've done it. We've passed laws mandating that the directors, that's what they are going to do. And so I just want to ask the directors, Director Borja, Director Birch, until the law's changed, I suggest we stick to that law, our law, that says that's what our mission is and that's what we're going to do. Regardless of our personal opinions of whether USO should be given to the landowners or not, that's what the law currently says, And so unless we come in here and we advocate and we change that law, that's what we do. And I want to do that personally because that's what we have decided for decades that we were going to do since the land was taken. Since the land was taken, that is what we've decided to do. And it was taken in massive amounts, so I don't feel that we owe any consideration or feeling bad that we're going to violate some federal law, or we're going to not violate it, but we're going to challenge it. Why not challenge it? It was a massive land taking. Massive. And if we did not challenge that, none of the landowners would have had their land. None of the landowners who have land right now would have had their land if we were not bold, if we did not get unified, and we did not stick to what we decided for decades that we were going to do, and that was justice for Guam. That's why they did it. So many of you have come here today, and I want to thank you because it reminds us. It reminds us, you landowners remind us what that means, the real effects of it, the poverty that has ensued on Guam because of land takings, the generations without property, right? As Ms. Hernandez said, in the Chamorro homeland, Chamorros are the #1 population of homeless, the #1 population in poverty. And so I will work with the governor to find remedies for the land bank for those properties who the government of Guam had returned from the federal government and refused to give it to ancestral landowners. For those, we will find a remedy because that has been sitting for many years. But when we have a chance and the Secretary of the Navy has told us that this is excess lands, he agrees, I think we should not allow them any escape clause. We should be united and we should go for that. And I think it's very obvious that he said it was excess, the governor said it was excess, she saw it and said it was excess. And I applaud her for that. She got the Secretary of the Navy to agree, and I applaud her for that. And what we cannot allow is for them to try to give us some kind of rationale that, but a 99-year lease, it's not excess. 99 years, not excess. You know, if they don't need it for 99 years, it sounds excess to me, I guess, is what I'm going to say. And so, again, that's how I feel. I want to stand with you. I want to support you. I know how it feels. We are dwindling. The number of landowners who are still alive. The number of families who can stay united through all of this very difficult pressures, right? Pressures. And so, again, my sincere thank you for all the work that you've done, the directors for your work, for your time, and all of you landowners for your work and your time, your stakeholders on this hospital for keeping us clear on the financing, the skill sets that are going to be necessary, and really all of the decisions, the more that they can be open, the more the people of Guam can see these, the better we all are going to be. You know, we can all move forward together. I believe if we're going to invest $1 billion in a hospital or more, that it has to be something we all say yes, right? So, again, all of this, I appreciate all of your work and all of your patience and all of your time and all of your passion, everything. And let's work together. So that concludes. Thank you. Thank you for your consideration of us and my colleagues. And so that will conclude our oversight hearing today. We will follow up on some of the questions that were not answered. So it is right now 7:25 p.m. Situs Masi Tatlu.